Member of the House Select Committee on Intelligence, Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California, and Professor of Political Science and Director of the Institute for International Studies at Stanford University, former Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us this morning. Congressman Schiff, I want to start with you, as you are the ranking Democrat on the House Intel Committee. What questions do you now have, based on what you've learned just in the last 24 hours, that you go forward with an investigation into the ties between the Trump administration and Russia?
Well, here's what really disturbs me. It wasn't Flynn's lie that brought him down. It was the public exposure of that lie. The White House, as you've reported, knew about this weeks ago and did nothing to remove him. So this is either a White House that was knowledgeable and supportive of these secret conversations with the Russians about sanctions, or that simply has a very high tolerance for a patent falsehood. It's not, I think, as Kellyanne Conway says, a simple matter of his misleading the vice president. It was the vice president then misleading the entire country, and they were okay with that when it hadn't been exposed by the press. So I think it certainly begs the question about whether these calls that Flynn had with the Russian ambassador were known to other people in the White House, were known to the president, whether they have the support of the president as part of his changed policy towards Russia. This begs an awful lot of very important questions that really ought to be front and center as a part of our investigation of Russians' covert influence operations in the United States.
Congressman, concretely, what would you like Speaker Ryan to do today to exercise oversight from your branch of government?
Well, and of course the Republicans in Congress have been completely silent on this. I'd like him to call for the White House to explain exactly who was aware of Flynn's conversations, when they were aware of it, whether the president was informed about this, and indeed whether these conversations were sanctioned by the administration. Of course, nothing would be surprising about that, as appalling as that fact may be, but I'd like to see the Speaker join and make bipartisan the calls for the administration to be forthcoming about this.
Ambassador McFaul, given your experience with Russia, a lot of people on the show today have said don't get ahead of your skis when we all sort of tried to deduce that there's no way the president wasn't aware of these conversations with General Flynn by his side throughout the campaign and pretty much every day at the White House. We all have instincts. At some point, must we not be blind to everything that we see as it pertains to this president's relationship with Russia and potential danger that we see there and potential for blackmail?
Well, for me, I just have 100 more questions, right?
Yeah.
When you learn a bit more and it's revealed, as Congressman Schiff just said, not because the administration told us, but because somebody leaked this information to the Washington Post. That's the reason we know this. It wasn't them fully disclosing everything. So now I want to know a lot of things. Obviously, I want to know if the president himself instructed General Flynn to make those calls and to make those offers about holding off on the sanctions and the tit for tat. But I want to know some bigger questions. General Flynn traveled to Russia. He sat right next to Vladimir Putin for a dinner. We've seen the photos. What were they discussing then? Was there discussions, was there coordination between the campaign and the dump of the data at WikiLeaks? Now, I have zero information about that. I want to be clear about that. I've seen, innuendo and some things in a dossier that was released. I don't know the facts, but when something like this happens and you don't know the facts before, it makes you want to question all of those contacts before, and I just think we need an independent investigation to get to the bottom of all of this.
Mr. Ambassador, what do you think Vladimir Putin is thinking as he looks at the developments of the last 24 hours?
Well, there, of course, I know what the Russian media and the media close to the Kremlin is saying. They're saying this is all a bunch of they call it a witch hunt because it's Russia-phobia. This is the Pentagon. And
what do you think Putin's actually thinking? In other words, is there a way for him to gain advantage from this? Do you think he's maneuvering to do?
No, this is a setback for Putin, because in the constellation of senior people of making foreign policy around the president, General Flynn was considered somebody sympathetic to the Kremlin, somebody sympathetic to Russia. They've now lost one of their allies, and the other folks, especially Secretary Mattis, that they're thinking their stars are rising now.
Congressman, we had Senator Tom Coburn, former Senator Tom Coburn of Oklahoma, on a little while ago, and he echoed something a few people have said this morning, which is that there's no crime per se in trying to reset the relationship with Russia. If General Flynn was making some calls, as Ambassador McFaul has said he did under the Obama administration, and trying to say, hey, let's take a step back, let's create some space where we can talk and maybe change our relationship. What to you specifically in that phone call bothers you most?
Well, it bothers me that on the very day that the president was announcing sanctions to punish Russia over their interference in our campaign, interference that was designed to help Donald Trump, that his chief national security surrogate is potentially telling the Russians, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it, don't overreact. That, to me, is quite breathtaking. And I think the ambassador is exactly right. The bigger question here is, was this latest contact of Flynn with the Russian ambassador part of a long series of contacts? Did that involve a collusion during the campaign itself? That is very much the subject of our investigation in the Intelligence Committee. I would also like to see it elevated to an independent commission. But those are some of the most serious questions. It's not a crime to want to reset relations with Russia. It may be a naive idea at this point, given everything Russia is doing. But what would be a crime is if there was collusion during the campaign, and I think certainly the policy change, this appeasement, you will, of Putin would be a profound mistake for the country.
Julie Pace.
Congressman, in your role on the Intel Committee, have you been briefed on the transcript of these calls between Flynn and the Russian ambassador, and more broadly in the briefings that the Intelligence Committees received on the Russian hacking into the election? Was there anything troublesome to you about Flynn's role that was brought up in the course of those briefings?
You know, unfortunately, I can't go into the briefings that we've had. I can tell you that we were in the process of requesting the transcripts or recordings of these conversations. Indeed, we were still dealing with the published reports, so we didn't have confirmation that there were transcripts yet. But those are things that I think ought to be briefed to the Intelligence Committee. Frank, I think we're going to need to bring General Flynn in before the Intelligence Committee, as well as others, to probe exactly these questions. What were the nature of his contacts with Russia? What were the nature of his conversations with the Russian ambassador? When did they begin? How specific were they? And I think these transcripts or recordings obviously will help inform that part of the